Romantic relationships. The basic text offers a suggestion about romantic relationships, that we begin by writing about what we want, what we are asking for, and what we are getting. When we explore these simple questions, we begin to see how we can use the tools of recovery to change our behavior and our experience of intimacy. We learn to check our motives and to be honest about what we want. We begin to get free of our old baggage and experience relationships in the present tense. Practicing principles like honesty, courage, and faith opens us to the possibility of love, acceptance, and trust in our lives. What we want. We often hear that if we made a list for ourselves in early recovery of what we wanted, we would be selling ourselves short. It's not just in the beginning that this is true. Over and over, our dreams for ourselves are glimpses of God's will, not a road map. Many of us have found this in our romances, as well. We take on the project of finding a partner in much the same way we might shop for a new car. We make a list of the features we want or don't want, and begin evaluating available models based on our list. We may be surprised, on finding the one who seems to meet our criteria, when things still don't work out as we had planned. Our sponsor might suggest turning that list back on ourselves, asking what it would take for us to become the person we imagine as a partner. Others might suggest stepping away from such a list altogether, thinking instead about what would constitute a relationship we would like to be in. Some of us are masters of projection. By the time we go on a first date with someone, we have already imagined the whole relationship, from steamy beginning to bitter divorce. Allowing ourselves to be present means that we can have a relationship with a person, rather than a fantasy. Learning to live in the moment frees us to enjoy ourselves. Applying skills like communication and active listening, practicing principles like unity, compassion, and sharing. We can learn to use the tools we need to be in a solid relationship long before we are actually there. These behaviors don't just make us more likely to get what we want, they also make us happier and more fulfilled where we are. There is so much in the way of our ability to have the kind of relationships we want: fear, selfishness, reservations, the belief that it will just end badly. The more we take inventory, the more clearly we see the obstacles inside ourselves that stand between us and what we want. We may mistake our impulsiveness for intuition, and imagine that we have fallen in love as soon as we get excited. Or we might resist feeling at all. Not wanting to risk our hearts means that they never really get full. As we learn to open up, we also learn to survive being hurt. Strangely, as it gets easier to withstand that kind of hurt, it seems to happen less often. We choose better, come into relationships a little more cautiously, and learn to recognize and address signs of difficulty much sooner. Healthy relationships begin to replace the chaos that had consumed our lives. Sometimes we miss the chaos. Living without the drama and clutter of active addiction is strange. We may be compelled to create drama in recovery just so it feels familiar. Don't get into romantic relationships in your first year might be the most repeated, least listened to piece of advice in the fellowship. We need time to get our feet on the ground, to build support, to work some steps and figure out who we are, but many of us don't take that time in the beginning. This is like building a house without laying a foundation. Sooner or later that work needs to get done, and it's a lot easier to do it in the beginning than to try to build a foundation under a standing structure. Many of us who don't take that time in the beginning find that we need it later. If we survive that first breakup clean, we have a pretty good idea of what that time is for. Not all of us take a full year, and some of us take much more time before we start dating. We may even find that we are happier and more serene when we are single, and choose to stay that way. Once we figure out that there is nothing to be afraid of and no one right answer, we can answer the big questions for ourselves and know we can always change our mind later, if we choose. We want a magic formula that will make relationships okay. A year, 3 years, a fifth step, a round of steps. The truth is much simpler, but harder to define. Some of us are never ready and struggle all our lives. We know members who are scholars of our principles but have many failed marriages behind them. We also see newcomers stumble into a relationship and somehow make it work. When it works, we are happy to take the credit. When it doesn't work, we try to understand why. There are always lessons. Experience is what we get when we don't get what we want. But some lessons are so clear that we don't have to act out to learn them. With practice we develop personal responsibility, accountability, and discernment. Mostly we know when we are doing something wrong, taking advantage of someone who is vulnerable, being controlling, deceptive, or abusive, and we have a responsibility to ourselves as well as to the other person to stop it. It can be hard to admit, but the times when we most desire to be in a relationship are often the moments when we are least equipped to handle one. So many of us struggle with the fear that we will never have a partner, and that not having a life partner means we will always be alone. This kind of fear leads to panic, and to pain. When we are lonely, sad, or trying to distract ourselves, we may be willing to settle for things that are not actually what we want in the long term. When our priority is simply not being alone, we are likely to compromise our values or our priorities, to commit too quickly to a person we are just getting to know. There's an old saying, be careful what you pray for, you might get it. We mistake intensity or sex for intimacy, and are likely to think something is serious when we've really just been seeking distraction and a fix. Or we settle for sex when what we really want is love. Afraid of being alone, we patch the emptiness we feel with a relationship. He became my higher power and my drug of choice, said one member of the guy she dated when she was a newcomer. I was calling all the time, when I was bored or lonely or happy, asking, what are you doing? I was clean, with no tools and a new obsession. Nothing had changed. That same member also reported that someone suggested to her, if it's after 10 at night and it sounds like a good idea, don't do it. Sometimes it seems as if our latest drug of choice is another person. It can be surprising to discover that having a crush on someone turns so easily into self-obsession, but when we examine our thinking, we can see how concerned we are with whether we are being noticed and how we are being perceived. Too often, we let our recovery take a backseat to a new relationship. We find ourselves missing meetings, calling other people less often, and not working as hard on ourselves. There is no reason to be surprised if the relationship suffers when we are not caring for ourselves, but it can feel like we are taking needed energy out of the relationship when we take the time and space we need to work our program. We do the work to become the kind of person who is ready for the relationship we want, but we have to keep doing the work to be that person inside the relationship, as well. It's like pouring Miracle Girl on your recovery, one member said. If you want to get to know yourself, get into a relationship. No, said another. If you want to get to know your sponsor, get into a relationship. Some of us get clean and begin a pattern of apparently serious relationships that all end in calamity. The drama of falling in and out of love can be its own reward, and we seem to have the same relationship over and over with different people. The intensity of early love may be so compelling that we seek it again and again. Sometimes it's our behavior in the relationship that gets in the way, but we can also see trouble even before the relationships begin. We notice that we're choosing people who just aren't appropriate for us. We joke sometimes about having a broken picker, but the reality can be pretty painful. It's not surprising that some of us get strung out on sex. We want something to make us feel good, fast. Sometimes just the flirting is its own little high. We like playing the game. Making the connection is its own rush, even before anything happens. That is not to say that it's a problem for all of us, or even for all of us whose relationship with sex is casual. Like so many things in